When they took the last thing she had left, they expected her to break. They never imagined the Alpha King would be the one to remember it. The ancient ritual grounds of the Southern Pack were silent beneath the gray morning sky. Hundreds of wolves gathered around the circle of white stone, their voices lowered as Evelyn Carter stood alone at the center. She wore a simple cream dress, her hands folded calmly in front of her, while the cold wind moved through the long brown hair that had always been a part of who she was. To the pack, this moment was meant to represent shame. To Evelyn, it was another reminder that they had already decided her worth before knowing her heart. For years, Evelyn had lived as the Omega everyone overlooked. She was never the strongest. She was never the most admired. She had no powerful family name, no influence among the nobles, and no place beside the leaders of the pack. But she had something many of them had forgotten. She had kindness. She helped injured animals in the forest. She cared for elderly pack members who had no one else. She listened when others refused to hear. Yet kindness was often mistaken for weakness by those who only valued power. An Omega must understand her place, Lord Richard Vale announced before the gathered crowd. His words traveled across the stone circle, but Evelyn remained still. She had heard similar words her entire life. She knew how people looked at her. She knew they saw her as someone easy to dismiss. But they did not know how many times she had chosen patience over anger. They did not know how much strength it took to remain gentle in a world that rarely offered her gentleness in return. As the ritual continued, Evelyn closed her eyes. She did not want to remember the faces watching her. She did not want to carry their judgment with her. She focused instead on the sound of the wind, the movement of the trees, and the quiet voice inside her reminding her that another person's cruelty could never define her value. Then the sound of approaching horses echoed beyond the gathering. The crowd shifted. Conversation stopped. A presence arrived that changed the entire atmosphere. King Alexander Frost, the Alpha King of the Northern Realm, had entered the ritual grounds. Tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a black royal coat with silver details, he carried the calm authority of someone who had spent his life carrying a kingdom on his shoulders. His expression was cold, unreadable, and powerful. Everyone lowered their heads as he stepped forward. But Alexander was not looking at the crowd. He was looking at Evelyn. He saw the quiet dignity in her posture. He saw that she had every reason to be bitter, yet she remained composed. He saw something no one else had bothered to notice. A strength that did not need to announce itself. The ritual continued, and a single lock of Evelyn's hair fell onto the ancient stone beneath her. The crowd looked away, believing the moment represented her loss. But Alexander did not look away. His eyes remained fixed on that small fallen lock, as if it carried a meaning only he could understand. While everyone else saw a symbol of shame, the Alpha King saw a symbol of resilience. And for reasons even he could not explain, he stepped forward and quietly picked it up. In that moment, the entire pack became silent. They had expected the Northern King to ignore her. They had expected him to see what they saw. Instead, Alexander Frost held on to the one thing they had tried to use against her. And Evelyn Carter, the Omega they believed had nothing left to offer, became the person who captured the attention of the most powerful Alpha in the North. The moment King Alexander Frost picked up the fallen lock of hair, the entire ritual ground changed. No one spoke. No one moved. The people who had gathered to witness Evelyn Carter's humiliation now watched the Northern Alpha King with confusion. They had expected him to remain distant. They had expected him to see only what they saw. An Omega who had lost her standing. An Omega who had been publicly judged. An Omega they believed was no longer important. But Alexander did something no one predicted. He carefully placed the lock of hair inside a small silver container carried by one of his guards. It was not a gesture of pity. It was not an attempt to challenge the ritual. It was something quieter, something deeper. He had noticed the one thing everyone else ignored. Evelyn had stood alone before hundreds of people, yet she never begged for acceptance. She never looked for sympathy. She simply endured with a calm strength that seemed impossible to fake. After the ceremony ended, the crowd slowly began to leave. Their whispers followed Evelyn through the stone paths of the pack village. Some wondered why the Alpha King cared. Others questioned whether she had somehow gained his attention intentionally. But Evelyn heard every word. She always had. She knew the sound of judgment. She knew the difference between kindness and curiosity. Still, she continued walking with her head held high. She returned to the small home she shared near the edge of the territory, where the walls were simple and the furniture was modest. It was not a place of wealth, but it was a place where she could breathe. Evelyn placed a hand over her shortened hair and stood quietly by the window. She did not feel anger. She felt something closer to exhaustion. For so long, she had tried to prove that she was more than the opinions of others. Yet somehow, a single moment in front of the entire pack had reminded her how quickly people could decide someone's worth. Far away, in the northern kingdom, Alexander Frost returned to his fortress beneath the snowy mountains. The halls were filled with the usual silence of royal life. Servants bowed. Advisors waited. Reports were placed before him. But his thoughts remained somewhere else. On the stone circle, on Evelyn's steady expression, on the small lock of hair resting inside the silver container on his desk. Lord Richard Vale, one of the king's oldest advisors, noticed the change immediately. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "it was only a ritual from a southern pack. There is no reason to concern yourself with their internal matters." Alexander looked toward the container. "You believe it was only that?" Richard hesitated. "She is an Omega without influence. There are many like her." Alexander's expression remained calm. "That is exactly why most people fail to see them." The advisor became silent. Alexander had spent years surrounded by people who measured everything by power. Names, wealth, alliances, status. But Evelyn had stood before the world with nothing to protect her except her own dignity. And somehow, she had appeared stronger than everyone watching her. That evening, Alexander walked through the quiet halls of the northern fortress. The silver container remained in his hand. He did not know why he had kept it. He only knew that something about that moment stayed with him. The world had looked at Evelyn Carter and seen what had been taken away. He had seen what remained. Meanwhile, Evelyn prepared for another ordinary day, unaware that the most powerful alpha in the north had not forgotten her. She believed the ritual was finished. She believed her life would return to the same quiet existence as before. But destiny had already begun moving. And the small fallen lock of hair she thought represented shame had become the reason the Alpha King could not look away. Before the sun rose over the southern lands, Evelyn Carter was already awake. The village around her slowly came to life, with the sound of doors opening, footsteps crossing wooden paths, and voices beginning another ordinary day. For everyone else, the ritual had become yesterday's memory. For Evelyn, it was something she carried quietly. Not because she wanted to remember the humiliation, but because moments like that had a way of revealing the truth about people. She had learned that some looked at a person's worth only after seeing what they had lost. But Evelyn had always believed worth existed before anyone decided to recognize it. Her small home at the edge of the territory was peaceful. A warm fireplace, a simple wooden table, and a few plants near the window were enough for her. She did not own much, but she had created a place where she could feel safe. That morning, she prepared herbs for an elderly pack member who lived nearby. It was something she had done many times before. No one praised her for it. No one gathered to watch. But Evelyn never helped others because she wanted attention. She helped because she knew what it felt like to be forgotten. Meanwhile, in the northern kingdom, Alexander Frost continued his duties as Alpha King. The fortress was surrounded by endless mountains and covered in white snow, a symbol of strength and tradition. His days were filled with decisions, meetings, and responsibilities that never seemed to end. Yet something unusual followed him through every hall. The small silver container remained on his desk. His advisors noticed. His guards noticed. But no one understood why the fallen lock mattered to him. During a meeting, Lord Richard Vale brought forward reports from the southern territories. Alexander listened carefully until he heard Evelyn's name mentioned. "The Omega from the ritual has returned to her usual life," Richard said. "The matter should be considered finished." Alexander looked up. "Finished?" Richard nodded. "Yes, the ceremony served its purpose." For a moment, silence filled the room. "And what purpose was that?" Alexander asked. The advisor hesitated. "To remind the pack of tradition." Alexander looked toward the snowy mountains beyond the window. Tradition should protect dignity, not remove it. The room became quiet. No one expected the Alpha King to challenge an old custom so directly. Alexander had always respected the laws of the North. He had never been reckless with change. But he had also never ignored something that felt wrong. He remembered Evelyn standing in the center of that ritual circle. He remembered the way she remained calm, while everyone expected her to fall apart. He remembered that she never once looked at him as a king. She had only seen a person standing there. Days passed, and rumors slowly spread through the northern kingdom. People wondered why the Alpha King had shown interest in a southern Omega. Some believed it was curiosity. Others believed it was a temporary feeling. But Alexander knew it was something different. He was not drawn to Evelyn because others had hurt her. He was drawn to the fact that they had failed to understand her. Back in the southern village, Evelyn walked through the forest collecting herbs beneath the afternoon light. She had no idea that a kingdom far away was beginning to question the traditions that shaped her life. She had no idea that the man who kept the peace of her past everyone else ignored was preparing to step into her future. And she certainly did not know that the Alpha King who seemed impossible to reach was about to return to the place where he first saw her true strength. The southern village had grown quieter since the day of the ritual, but Evelyn Carter noticed something others did not. The silence was different. Before, people had whispered because they judged her. Now, they whispered because they were uncertain. Something had changed, even if no one wanted to admit it. Evelyn continued living the same way she always had. She woke before sunrise, prepared herbs, helped neighbors, and walked through the forest paths she knew better than anyone. She did not expect the world to suddenly become kinder. She had learned that hope was something to protect carefully. Yet deep inside, she wondered why the image of the Alpha King standing among the crowd remained in her thoughts. She remembered his silence. She remembered the way he looked at the fallen lock of hair. Most people had seen a reminder of shame. He had seen something else. Far away in the northern kingdom, Alexander Frost made a decision that surprised the entire court. He would travel south himself. The official reason was simple. He needed to review the traditions of the southern packs and speak with their leaders. But those closest to him understood there was another reason. He wanted to see Evelyn Carter again. The journey took several days through forests, valleys, and snow-covered roads. When Alexander finally reached the southern territory, the difference between the north and this land was impossible to ignore. The north was built on discipline and structure. The south was warmer, quieter, and filled with small villages surrounded by nature. Alexander entered Evelyn's village without the grand display usually expected of a king. He did not want his arrival to become a spectacle. He wanted to observe. And what he saw surprised him. He saw Evelyn helping an elderly woman carry supplies. He saw her stop to comfort a frightened child who had lost a small toy. He saw villagers who once ignored her now watching her with a mixture of respect and regret. They were beginning to understand what they had failed to see. Evelyn was not valuable because of what she could offer them. She was valuable because of who she already was. Alexander found her near the edge of the forest as the afternoon light faded between the trees. She recognized his footsteps before he spoke. "Your Majesty," she said softly. "I did not expect you here." Alexander looked at her. "Neither did I." Evelyn smiled slightly. "That sounds like something a king should not say." For a brief moment, the cold expression of the Alpha King softened. "Perhaps I am still learning." The answer surprised her. Most people imagined kings as people who had everything figured out. But Alexander's voice carried something different. A quiet honesty. "Why did you keep it?" Evelyn asked after a moment. "Keep what?" "The lock of hair." Alexander became silent. He could have given a simple answer. He could have said it was because he respected her. But the truth was more complicated. "Because everyone there saw something being taken from you," he said. "I saw something that remained." Evelyn lowered her gaze. She did not know how to respond. No one had ever spoken about her that way. Not after the ritual. Not before. The wind moved gently through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and winter air. For the first time, Evelyn felt that someone was not looking at the person the world had created in their minds. He was seeing her. Not the Omega. Not the one who had been judged. Just Evelyn. And Alexander Frost realized that the person he traveled across the kingdom to find was not someone waiting to be saved. She was someone who had been standing strong all along. The morning after Alexander Frost's visit, the southern village felt different. Nothing about the buildings had changed. The small wooden homes still stood along the quiet paths, and the forest still surrounded the village with its endless green and silver colors. But the people looked at Evelyn Carter differently. They had begun to notice the things that had always been there. The kindness in her words. The patience in her actions. The way she helped others without expecting anything in return. For years, They had mistaken her gentleness for weakness. Now, they were starting to understand that it had always been her greatest strength. Evelyn did not know what to do with the sudden attention. She had spent so much time being ignored that acceptance felt unfamiliar. When villagers offered her smiles or thanked her for small acts of kindness, she often wondered if they truly meant it. She was not searching for approval. She had learned to live without it. But a part of her still remembered what it felt like to have everyone look away. Meanwhile, Alexander remained in the Southern Territory longer than anyone expected. The Alpha King was known for making quick decisions and returning to the north, yet this time he stayed. He observed the village. He listened to the people. Most importantly, he watched Evelyn. He noticed that she never changed because someone important was nearby. She treated a farmer, a child, and a royal guard with the same respect. To Evelyn, a person's value was never decided by their position. That belief fascinated Alexander. In the Northern Court, every interaction was influenced by status. Every word carried meaning. Every gesture was carefully considered. But Evelyn moved through life without pretending. One evening, Alexander found her sitting near the edge of the forest, organizing herbs beneath the fading sunlight. "You always come here alone?" he asked. Evelyn smiled when she recognized his voice. "The forest is not as lonely as people think." Alexander looked around. Most people would be uncomfortable in a place like this. "Most people listen only for what they expect to hear," she replied. "The forest does not do that." Her answer stayed with him. Alexander had spent years surrounded by people who spoke carefully because they wanted something from him. Evelyn spoke honestly because she had nothing to prove. "Do you regret what happened at the ritual?" he asked quietly. Evelyn was silent for a moment. The question carried more weight than he expected. "I regret that people believed they had the right to decide my worth," she finally answered. "But I do not regret surviving it." Alexander looked at her with a new understanding. She was not defined by that moment. She had already moved beyond it. The person he saw before him was not someone broken by the past. She was someone who had carried herself through it with grace. Later that night, Alexander returned to the temporary royal residence in the village. He opened the small silver container holding the fallen lock of hair. For the first time, he understood why he had kept it. It was not because of the ritual. It was not because of the cruelty others had shown. It was because that single moment revealed something rare. Evelyn had been surrounded by judgment, yet she had remained herself. The next morning, a message arrived from the Northern Court. The council requested Alexander's return. There were matters waiting for the Alpha King. There were questions about why he had traveled south. There were concerns about his interest in an Omega without noble connections. Alexander read the message quietly. Then he looked toward the village where Evelyn lived. For the first time in many years, he was not thinking about what tradition demanded. He was thinking about what was right. And soon, the entire kingdom would have to face the same question he had already answered. Could they continue judging someone they never truly understood? The journey back to the Northern Kingdom felt different for Alexander Frost. The same mountain roads stretched before him. The same cold winds moved across the valleys, and the same fortress waited beyond the snowy peaks. Yet the Alpha King who returned was not exactly the same man who had left. Something had changed during his time in the southern village. He had gone there expecting to review a tradition. Instead, he had discovered a truth that challenged everything he had accepted before. Evelyn Carter remained in his thoughts. Not because she needed his protection, not because she had been treated unfairly, but because she had shown a kind of strength that could not be measured by rank or power. When Alexander arrived at the northern fortress, the royal council was already waiting. The grand hall was filled with advisors, noble families, and leaders who had traveled from different territories. They greeted him respectfully, but the questions came quickly. "Your Majesty, why did you personally travel to the southern pack?" one advisor asked. Alexander looked across the room. He knew they were not simply asking about his journey. They were asking why a king would spend time with someone they considered unimportant. "I went because I wanted to understand a tradition that many follow without question," Alexander answered. Lord Richard Vale stepped forward. "The ritual has existed for generations. It represents order among the packs." Alexander remained calm. "Does order require someone to lose their dignity?" Silence filled the hall. The question was simple, but no one had an easy answer. For years, the Northern Court had valued stability above everything else. Traditions were protected because they were old, not always because they were right. Alexander looked toward the windows where snow covered the kingdom below. A kingdom is not strengthened by how it treats those with power. It is revealed by how it treats those without it. The advisors exchanged uncertain glances. They were used to the Alpha King making decisions based on strategy. They were not used to hearing him speak about compassion and fairness. Meanwhile, Evelyn continued her quiet life in the southern village. She had no idea that her name was being discussed inside the northern palace. She spent her mornings helping villagers, gathering herbs, and walking through the forest where she found peace. But something had changed inside her as well. Before meeting Alexander, she believed powerful people could never truly understand someone like her. Now she wondered if perhaps some people simply needed the chance to see beyond appearances. One afternoon, a royal messenger arrived at the village. The entire community gathered as the message was delivered. Evelyn listened carefully as she learned that the Northern Kingdom had invited her to visit the royal fortress. She was surprised. She did not understand why the Alpha King wanted her there. She had done nothing to earn such attention. That evening, Evelyn stood outside her home beneath the fading sky. She touched the shorter ends of her hair and remembered the ritual that had changed everything. For so long, she believed that moment represented something taken from her. But now she saw it differently. It had revealed who people truly were. It had shown her who looked away and who chose to see. Far away, Alexander stood in the royal hall holding the small silver container that carried the fallen lock. He knew inviting Evelyn to the north would create questions. He knew the court would challenge his decision. But for the first time, he was not afraid of disappointing tradition, because he had finally learned something important. A true leader did not protect customs simply because they existed. A true leader protected what was right. And soon, Evelyn Carter would step into a world that once seemed impossible to reach, where the cold walls of the Northern Kingdom would finally have to recognize the strength of the Omega they had never taken the time to understand. The gates of the Northern Kingdom opened beneath a sky filled with falling snow as Evelyn Carter arrived at the royal fortress. She had imagined many things about this place, but nothing prepared her for the silence and grandeur surrounding her. The towering stone walls, the endless halls, and the careful movements of the royal servants all reminded her that she had entered a world far different from her own. Yet she did not feel afraid. She had learned that a place did not decide a person's worth. The heart of the people inside it did. Alexander Frost stood at the entrance waiting for her. The court expected the Alpha King to appear distant and untouchable, but when Evelyn stepped forward, his expression softened slightly. "Welcome to the North," he said. Evelyn lowered her head respectfully. "Thank you for allowing me to visit." Alexander looked at her for a moment. "You are not here because you owe anyone anything." His words surprised her. "Then why am I here?" she asked. The Alpha King paused before answering. "Because some truths should not remain hidden." Those words followed Evelyn as she entered the fortress. The same halls where nobles once questioned her now carried whispers about her arrival. Some servants looked at her with curiosity. Some nobles looked at her with doubt. But Evelyn remained the same person she had always been. She did not try to impress anyone. She did not pretend to belong. She simply walked with quiet confidence. Lady Vanessa Whitmore watched from the upper balcony. She had spent years preparing herself for a future beside the Alpha King. She believed power, beauty, and family connections were the things that created a perfect match. Seeing Evelyn welcomed into the fortress challenged everything she believed. "She is only an Omega from a small southern pack," Vanessa said quietly. "Why would the king bring her here?" Lord Richard Vale stood nearby. "That is the question everyone wants answered." Meanwhile, Alexander showed Evelyn the royal gardens behind the fortress. Unlike the grand halls, the gardens were peaceful. Snow rested on the branches, and the sound of a nearby stream created a calm atmosphere. "This place is beautiful," Evelyn said. Alexander looked at her with curiosity. "You cannot see it." Evelyn smiled gently. "Not with my eyes. But beauty is not only something people look at." Her answer made him silent. Alexander had spent his entire life surrounded by people who valued appearances. Evelyn reminded him that some things were understood in a different way. As they walked through the garden, the royal wolf companions nearby approached Evelyn without hesitation. The servants noticed. The guards noticed. Even the nobles watching from a distance noticed. Animals seemed to recognize the kindness in her before people did. That evening, the council gathered again. They questioned Alexander's decision to bring Evelyn into the north. They worried about tradition, reputation, and the expectations of the royal bloodline. But Alexander remained calm. "You see her past," he said. "I see her character." The room became quiet. No one could deny that Evelyn had done nothing wrong. They only questioned her because she did not fit the image they expected. In her guest chamber, Evelyn sat near the window and listened to the sounds of the fortress. She knew this place was not simple. She knew many people would continue to judge her. But for the first time, she also knew there was someone willing to stand beside her. In the heart of the Northern Kingdom, a quiet change had begun. The Alpha King was no longer protecting an old tradition. He was protecting the truth that everyone else had ignored. The days that followed Evelyn Carter's arrival in the Northern Kingdom revealed something unexpected. The fortress that once felt distant and impossible to reach slowly became a place where she could breathe. She still noticed the quiet conversations around her. She still felt the uncertainty from some nobles who had not accepted her presence. But she no longer allowed their opinions to define her. She had spent years living in a world that told her she was not enough. The North was simply another place where she had to prove that those voices were wrong. Alexander Frost watched the changes carefully. He noticed how Evelyn treated everyone in the fortress with the same kindness. She thanked servants who brought her meals. She listened to guards who shared stories about their families. She remembered small details about people that others often ignored. To the court, these actions seemed ordinary. To Alexander, they revealed the kind of character that could not be taught. One evening, Alexander invited Evelyn to the royal library. It was one of the oldest rooms in the fortress, filled with ancient books, family records, and stories passed through generations. "Why did you bring me here?" Evelyn asked as she listened to the quiet sound of pages turning in the distance. Alexander walked toward the shelves. "Because this kingdom remembers many things. But sometimes, it remembers the wrong things." Evelyn turned slightly toward him. She understood what he meant. The ritual had been remembered for generations, but no one had questioned whether it truly honored the people involved. Alexander reached into a small drawer and carefully removed the silver container he had carried since the day they met. Evelyn became silent when she heard it open. "You kept it all this time," she said softly. "Yes." "Why?" Alexander looked at the small lock of hair inside. "Because that moment showed me something I had never seen before." He paused. "Everyone around you wanted you to believe you had lost something important, but you stood there with more dignity than anyone in that circle." Evelyn did not answer immediately. She had heard many words about herself throughout her life. Most of them came from people who wanted to decide who she should be. But Alexander's words were different. He was not describing what others thought she was. He was describing what he had truly seen. "I thought that day would always remind me of what happened," Evelyn admitted. "Now I think it reminds me that I survived it." Alexander looked at her with quiet respect. "That is why I kept it." For the first time, Evelyn understood that the fallen lock was not a symbol of shame anymore. It had become a reminder that something taken from her could never take away who she was. Outside the library, rumors continued throughout the fortress. Some nobles believed Alexander was allowing emotion to influence his decisions. Others believed Evelyn was seeking a place she had not earned. But they did not understand what the Alpha King had already discovered. Evelyn was not asking for a crown. She was not asking for power. She was simply existing as herself, and that alone challenged the beliefs of those who had spent years judging others by appearance and status. Later that night, Alexander stood on the balcony overlooking the snowy kingdom. He held the silver container one more time before placing it safely away. He knew a difficult conversation with the council was coming. He knew many would question his choices. But for the first time, he was certain of his path. The woman they had tried to shame had shown him a strength greater than any title. And soon, the entire kingdom would have to see it too. The great hall of the Northern Kingdom was filled with quiet anticipation. The council members stood beneath the ancient banners of the realm, waiting for the Alpha King to speak. For generations, the kingdom had followed traditions without question. They believed old customs created strength. They believed status determined value. But on this day, Alexander Frost stood before them knowing that some beliefs were never meant to remain unchanged. Evelyn Carter stood nearby, calm and composed. She did not wear a royal symbol. She did not ask for recognition. She simply stood as herself, the same Omega who had walked through judgment without losing her kindness. Many in the hall remembered the day of the ritual. They remembered how the crowd had looked away. But now, they were forced to see what they had ignored. Alexander stepped forward. A kingdom is not measured by how it honors those who already have power, he said. It is measured by how it treats those who have none. The room became silent. His words carried through the hall with the authority of a king, but also with the honesty of a man who had learned something important. He looked toward Evelyn. This woman was judged before anyone tried to understand her. She was defined by what others believed she lacked. But I witnessed something different. Evelyn listened quietly. She had never expected anyone to speak for her. She had spent her entire life learning to stand on her own. But there was something meaningful about hearing the truth finally spoken aloud. She showed patience when others showed judgment. Alexander continued. She showed kindness when others showed indifference. She carried dignity when others tried to convince her she had lost it. The council members lowered their eyes. Some still struggled to accept the change. Some still held on to old beliefs. But no one could deny the truth of Alexander's words. Evelyn had never asked for special treatment. She had only asked to be seen as a person. Later that evening, Evelyn returned to the royal garden with Alexander. Snow covered the pathways, and the soft light of the setting sun painted the fortress walls with gold. You changed the way people see things, Evelyn said. Alexander looked at her. No, you did. I only gave them a reason to look. She smiled gently. It was the first time she truly believed that the past no longer controlled her future. The moment that once represented shame had become the beginning of something new. The fallen lock of hair was no longer a reminder of what others tried to take away. It was a reminder of what remained when everything else was questioned. Her courage, her kindness, her identity. In the months that followed, the Northern Kingdom slowly changed. The people learned that strength was not always loud. Sometimes it existed in quiet choices, gentle words, and the courage to remain kind when the world expected bitterness. Alexander remained the powerful ruler the kingdom respected, but those closest to him knew he had changed as well. He no longer measured people by titles or traditions alone. He looked deeper. He listened more carefully. And he never forgot the lesson Evelyn had unknowingly taught him. The Omega they once overlooked had become the person who reminded an entire kingdom what true honor meant. The Alpha King who had witnessed her lowest moment became the one who protected her highest truth. Together, they created a future where dignity mattered more than judgment, and where a gentle heart could change even the coldest kingdom in the north.